What if the person you trusted the most was hiding a secret that could destroy your life? Pastor Elijah thought he was hearing from God, but what he really heard was his own desire. He believes every word that comes from the mouth of his wife. Even members of the congregation worship the wife and always call her Mommy G.O., not knowing that Mommy G.O. was hiding a dark side. Hey friends, thanks for stopping by again. Today I've got a story that's going to keep you hooked till the end. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so you're always in the loop for our next story. In the bustling city of Lagos, Pastor Elijah Nwankwo was a name almost everyone respected. He wasn't just any pastor, he was the founder of Harvest Fire Ministry, one of the fastest-growing churches in the city. From the moment he stepped onto the pulpit, people felt something special about him. His voice carried authority, but also warmth, and his words seemed to touch the deepest corners of every heart. Every Sunday, the church was overflowing. People came from across Lagos just to hear him preach. He had a tall, commanding presence, but his eyes reflected gentleness. His life seemed perfect, a devoted man of God, a loving father, and a wise leader. Young men admired him, hoping to follow in his footsteps. Women wished their husbands could be as disciplined and prayerful. Parents trusted him to guide their children. And yet, like every great story, perfection was only the surface. Then came Lydia, a very beautiful lady. From the very first day the congregation saw her, there was something different about her presence. She was beautiful, of course, but it wasn't just that. There was a sharp intelligence in her eyes, a quiet confidence in the way she walked, and a calm assurance in the way she spoke. Unlike the other pastors' wives, Lydia did not blend into the crowd or stay in the background. People noticed her immediately. Some admired her, others whispered among themselves. Lydia had a sense of style that was modern but elegant. She never flaunted herself, but she moved in a way that drew attention naturally. Some women whispered, "Is she really suitable to be a pastor's wife?" Some men's eyes lingered a little too long. Yet, Pastor Elijah seemed not disturbed. He introduced her with pride, explaining that God had brought them together. He believed with all his heart that she was his partner for life, chosen by divine design. Even before the wedding, some elders in the church felt uneasy, not because Lydia was dishonest or malicious, but because there was something intangible in her demeanor. She wasn't like other women in the congregation. She asked questions, challenged ideas, and had her own opinions. Some feared her independence might clash with the expectations of a pastor's household. During one quiet meeting in the church office, the elders tried to express their concerns. "Pastor," the oldest among them began cautiously, "we know you are a man of God, and we respect your discernment, but this woman, she is different. We are concerned whether she is fully prepared for the life you lead." Pastor Elijah smiled gently. "I understand your worries, my brothers and sisters. I appreciate your guidance, but I must tell you, God revealed to me that Lydia is the one for me. I have prayed, and I know this is His will. Who am I to question God?" The elders exchanged uneasy glances. They knew arguing against someone claiming divine direction could be dangerous, and so they remained silent, albeit with heavy hearts. The wedding was a grand affair. Lagos's church community gathered to celebrate, and Lydia wore a simple yet elegant white gown. Pastor Elijah looked radiant, completely convinced that this was the beginning of a blessed union. For a few months, everything seemed perfect. Lydia adapted to some of the expectations, attending church programs, smiling at members, and showing warmth to the congregation. Pastor Elijah felt vindicated. He believed God had confirmed his choice. Yet, beneath the surface, subtle cracks began to form. Lydia sometimes appeared distracted or impatient when church obligations interrupted her plans. She smiled, but there were moments when her gaze seemed distant. Pastor Elijah, choked up with lots of work, dismissed these signs. He was certain that his prayers and guidance would align their lives perfectly.
But as the weeks passed, gossips have already started going round the congregation about the new pastor's wife. Some members noticed Lydia's quiet independence and wondered if Pastor Elijah had been too hasty. Still, no one dared question him directly. After all, a man who claimed to hear God's voice could not be wrong, or so they thought. Little did anyone know, beneath Lydia's calm exterior lies a dark and immoral side, one that would challenge Pastor Elijah's faith, his understanding of love, and the very foundation of his household. In the weeks that followed Pastor Elijah and Lydia's wedding, life in Harvest Fire Ministry continued much as before, but quiet signs of tension started to appear. Lydia was polite and composed during services, but those closest to the pastor began to notice small signs that something wasn't entirely right. The elders, men and women who had served faithfully for decades, watched quietly, exchanging glances whenever Lydia passed by. Their discomfort wasn't born of malice, it was born of observation, intuition, and years of experience in guiding families of faith. Lydia didn't act out in obvious ways. She didn't argue openly or cause public scandals. Instead, her distance was quiet, almost imperceptible, and that made it all the more troubling. Sister Grace, one of the most respected women in the church, noticed that Lydia rarely engaged with the women's fellowship. She smiles, she nods, but she never really participates, she whispered to Elder Daniel during a meeting. It's like she's here, but not here. Elder Daniel frowned. It's subtle, yes, but in time this kind of detachment can spread. People start questioning the heart behind the smile. They'll see the lack of connection as indifference, and the congregation will notice. Meanwhile, Pastor Elijah remained unaware of these concerns. He was consumed by his ministry, preparing sermons, counseling church members, visiting the sick, and attending prayer meetings that stretched late into the night. To him, Lydia's occasional distractions seemed trivial. He believed her moments of distance were normal adjustments to married life and the attention required of a pastor's household. But the elders of the church couldn't ignore it. One afternoon, they gathered quietly in the church office. Elder Samuel, the youngest among them but sharp-minded, spoke first. "Pastor, we mean this with the deepest respect, but we've noticed Lydia sometimes seems distant from the congregation. She doesn't participate fully, and she keeps to herself." Pastor Elijah nodded, his expression calm. "I've noticed she's reserved at times, but I trust her. God has brought her to me, and I believe He will guide her to be part of the ministry in His own way. She has her own personality, and that's fine." Elder Grace hesitated. "We only want to protect you and the church, Elijah. A pastor's household sets an example. Even subtle detachment or distance can influence others. If Lydia continues to remain uninvolved, it may create misunderstandings among the congregation." Pastor Elijah leaned back in his chair, sighing. "I appreciate your concern. Truly, I do. But I cannot force her to act in a way that doesn't come naturally. God has given me a partner, and I must trust him and her to lead rightly." Despite his words, the elders left the office uneasy. They had seen families collapse over far less, and they knew that ignoring early signs often led to deeper heartbreak. "We must watch carefully," Sister Grace whispered to Elder Samuel after the meeting. "This is only the beginning. Something tells me there's more beneath the surface than we can see." Meanwhile, Lydia's life outside church began to expand quietly. She visited friends and old acquaintances, attended small gatherings, and indulged in moments of personal freedom. To the congregation, she was still the picture of composure and charm, but behind closed doors, her heart carried unspoken questions about attention, love, and emotional connection that she was not receiving from her husband.
Pastor Elijah, meanwhile, remained unaware of the storm quietly forming in the shadows. Every day he poured himself into sermons and prayers, convinced that God had placed Lydia at his side.
But God's work often requires discernment as much as faith, and Elijah's unwavering trust in his own judgment, in his belief that divine guidance always aligned with his desires, was slowly setting the stage for a test he could never have anticipated. Months passed, and life at the Harvest Fire Ministry in Lagos seemed perfect to the congregation. Pastor Elijah continued his tireless devotion, preaching, counseling, visiting the sick, and preparing sermons. To the world, he was a model husband and leader, but behind the walls of their home, silence and tension were growing. Pastor Elijah loved Lydia deeply, but his attention was mostly directed toward God and the church. He prayed for her, spoke encouraging words, and hoped that spiritual guidance would keep their marriage strong. Yet the small gestures of intimacy and emotional connection, laughter, meaningful conversation, or quiet moments together were rare. Lydia felt unseen, craving a recognition that never fully came. Her longing began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Within the church there was a brother, Michael, a trusted and devoted member, someone who often stayed after service to pray and assist with ministry work. He listened when Lydia spoke, noticed when she was stressed, and offered small kindnesses that made her feel alive again. It started with conversations during church events and after meetings. Michael would ask about her day, offer encouragement, and make her laugh in ways Pastor Elijah no longer could. Slowly, Lydia found herself seeking these moments, craving his attention more than she wanted to admit. The connection grew quietly, under the guise of friendship, but it was no longer innocent. At home, Pastor Elijah sensed a subtle shift in her mood, but misread it. He assumed her quietness was normal, a natural adaptation to married life, or even a spiritual trial that required prayer. He continued to trust his judgment, convinced that God had placed Lydia at his side for his purposes. Meanwhile, elders like Sister Grace noticed Lydia's independence and subtle absence during fellowship, but she maintained an impeccable public image. To the congregation, she smiled, nodded, and participated in church activities, leaving no hint of the emotional distance growing between her and her husband. Months turned into a year, and Lydia's secret grew heavier with each passing day. Her quiet friendship with Brother Michael had deepened into something far more dangerous, an affair hidden just between them. To Pastor Elijah, she was still the devoted wife he prayed for daily, yet the emotional and spiritual distance between them had grown impossible to ignore. Few months later, Mommy G.O. got pregnant. I know you might think the pastor is responsible for the child, but don't worry, you will hear the shocking gist soon. So, Lydia got pregnant after few months. Pastor Elijah's heart leaped with joy when she told him, believing it was God's blessing. He thanked God fervently, imagining the child would strengthen their bond and add a new blessing to the church family. He had no idea that the child was not his. Lydia's pregnancy was announced with joy and fanfare. The congregation at Harvest Fire Ministry rejoiced, calling her Mummy G.O., praising her beauty, grace, and the blessing she was carrying. Pastor Elijah was ecstatic. He thanked God every day, decorating the nursery, reading books about parenting, and imagining a happy, complete family. In his eyes, the child was a divine gift meant to strengthen their marriage and inspire the church. 9 months later, Lydia gave birth to a bouncing baby boy, and they named him Chima. Pastor Elijah was so happy, same with members of the congregation. Days turned into weeks, and that was how 3 years passed, and Pastor Elijah was busy training another man's child, thinking it was his. But life, as it often does, had its own plans. Months later, Chima began falling ill repeatedly. Fever after fever, one visit after another to the hospital, left Pastor Elijah worried but hopeful. Doctors couldn't find an obvious cause at first, and Lydia stayed composed, attending church and events with her usual charm, while quietly feeling a pang of guilt that only she understood. During one particularly worrisome hospital visit, a doctor noticed a strange pattern in Chima's blood type, which didn't seem compatible with Pastor Elijah's own. The doctors suggested a paternity test, speaking quietly to avoid alarming Lydia. "It's routine," the doctor insisted. "Sometimes these things happen. It's for clarity and proper treatment." Pastor Elijah refused immediately. "No," he said firmly, gripping Lydia's hand. "Faith, not suspicion. God has blessed us. I will not doubt this child or my wife." He returned home with renewed hope, believing God would heal the baby and that nothing was amiss. But the seeds of doubt was already planted in him. The hospital records, the repeated illnesses, and the whispered suggestion of a test lingered in Pastor Elijah's mind. At church, he continued to smile, preach, and console worried members, but each night he prayed harder, sensing, though he couldn't name it, that something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Lydia carried a heavy burden. Her secret affair with Brother Michael had now entangled her completely. The child she gave birth to wasn't Pastor Elijah's child, and each doctor visit, each worried glance from her husband pressed the guilt deeper into her heart. She played the role of devoted wife perfectly, yet with every passing day, the web of deceit tightened. Like a storm on the horizon, suspense builds. Let me ask you, dear viewers, when will the truth finally come out? Do you think Pastor Elijah will agree to the paternity test? Drop your thought in the comment before we uncover a great shock.
After the second hospitalization, Pastor Elijah was troubled by a constant feeling of unease. Chima's repeated illnesses were unusual, and even his prayers for healing didn't bring the comfort they once had. Every visit to the hospital left him more anxious, a quiet dread settling in his chest. Lydia, too, felt the weight of the secret she carried. The joy she had feigned for months was cracking. She saw Pastor Elijah's worry, his careful attention, and she felt a pang of fear, not just for the child, but for herself. Every small gesture from him reminded her of the lie she had been living. One cool evening, Pastor Elijah accidentally saw messages from Brother Michael on Lydia's phone. The messages were affectionate, personal, far beyond casual friendship or church brother stuffs. He read the messages carefully, feeling his stomach twist and his heart beating too fast. The tender words, the hidden meetings, the jokes that only they shared, it all confirmed what he had suspected for months. Yet he struggled to process the betrayal. It was a storm of emotions, but he confronted Lydia gently at first, asking questions about Michael, about her time at church, about the child. Lydia's composure faltered. The fear in her eyes, the trembling in her voice, the guilt she could no longer hide, it all built up. Lydia, seeing that she has been caught, she confessed. Yes, Lydia confessed. Her voice shook as she admitted to the affair with Brother Michael. The confession hit Pastor Elijah like a physical blow, yet he braced himself, ready to process this betrayal. But the shocking truth came next. Lydia's eyes filled with tears as she revealed the part that even Pastor Elijah could not have imagined. Chima was not Brother Michael's child. The child belonged to an old university friend, someone Lydia had met recently and had a brief affair with. Pastor Elijah's world tilted violently. Over here, there is a slang we normally use to describe this kind of situation: everywhere first blur. Lydia continued, her words barely above a whisper, explaining that this meant she had been unfaithful to him and going about having secret affairs with different men, not just Michael. The weight of it all was unbearable. Pastor Elijah sank into the nearest chair, staring at the floor. The child he had loved, the marriage he had cherished, the home he had built, everything now rested on years of deception. Lydia sobbed, fully aware of the devastation she had caused, while Pastor Elijah struggled to breathe, caught between disbelief, heartbreak, and the dawning reality of betrayal that was far deeper than he ever could have imagined.
The truth had erupted like a storm, leaving Pastor Elijah reeling. The church, the home, and the life he had built with Lydia were shattered. The revelation that Chima was not his child, that Lydia had been unfaithful with multiple men, including Brother Michael and an old university friend, left him feeling exposed and betrayed. His faith remained, but his trust in his wife, in people around him, even in himself, had been shaken to the core.
After days of prayer, reflection, and quiet counsel with a few trusted mentors, Pastor Elijah made a decision that he will step down as the head of Harvest Fire Ministry, not in anger or shame, but in conscious accountability. In a packed Sunday service, he stood at the pulpit, his hands trembling, his eyes red from sleepless nights and tears. "My beloved congregation," he began, his voice heavy yet steady, "I have failed you. I failed my family. I failed as a husband and a pastor. I ignored the wise counsel of those who loved me. I silenced honest conversations, claiming God spoke to me, when in reality it was my own desires guiding my decisions. For this, I apologize sincerely." The church was silent. Some wept, some nodded in understanding, and many felt the weight of the lesson before them. Pastor Elijah explained, without revealing unnecessary details about Lydia, that the marriage had ended. It ended peacefully, but painfully. Lydia and the child moved on, and he learned to release both anger and regret, choosing to focus on personal growth and healing. Years later, Pastor Elijah returned, not as a celebrity preacher, not as the man whose charisma drew crowds, but as a mentor and guide for young leaders and pastors. He founded a small ministry focused on integrity, accountability, and emotional intelligence, particularly within marriage and leadership. He spoke openly about the dangers of confusing personal desire with divine instruction, teaching that discernment was a skill to cultivate, not an assumption to take for granted. His messages emphasized lessons learned the hard way: emotional intelligence in marriage, truly understanding and connecting with one's partner; discernment versus desire, distinguishing God's voice from personal longing; accountability in leadership, listening to counsel, admitting mistakes, and acting with humility. Pastor Elijah never remarried. He devoted his life to mentoring others and sharing the story of his rise, fall, and eventual growth. At the close of every session, he left the young pastors and leaders with the same warning: not every voice in your head is God. Sometimes it is desire wearing a religious robe. Learn to listen carefully, choose wisely, and remember, humility and honesty will carry you further than pride and blind faith ever could. In Lagos, his story became a cautionary tale, not one of shame, but of resilience, accountability, and the power of rising from the deepest betrayal to become a wiser, humbler servant of God.
Thank you so much for watching and sticking with me all the way to the end of today's story. I hope you felt every twist and turn as much as I did while sharing it with you. Now, I want to hear from you. What lessons did you take away from today's story? What do you think about Lydia's choices? Was she wrong, or was there something Pastor Elijah could have done differently? Should we blame Pastor Elijah for not being emotionally present for his wife, or should we blame Lydia for not being content with what she had? I encourage you to drop your thoughts in the comments below. Nobody should feel shy. This is a safe space for us all to share, reflect, and learn from each other. I'll be going through your comments and giving a follow-up to your thoughts and suggestions. Remember, every perspective matters, and together we can understand the story better and learn lessons that apply to our own lives. So, don't hold back. I really want to know what you think.